In this lesson, we are talking about some advanced concepts for webhooks on Make. First, a quick reminder, you've already seen these ones inside the previous courses, and that is about the scenario statuses and the webhook statuses. So there is a difference between a webhook being turned on and a scenario actually being turned on. Let me demonstrate that to you. So right now we have this webhook. If we go to webhooks on the left-hand side and then check our webhooks, they are all turned on. All right. And here is a scenario that simply triggers that webhook. We use a post method and then we add like one simple variable in the body. So request content. And then for email, for example, info@techflow.ai. And we just want to send that one. We don't need a response. Actually, let's parse the response and also turn on the evaluate all states as errors. All right, if we trigger this now, it gives us an accepted response because our webhook is active on the webhooks tab. So it is actually this webhook set A. If you go here, set A, and this is turned on. Now, if I refresh this, this should show 1 in the queue because our scenario was not turned on and therefore it got not executed, but got saved in the queue. So whenever we turn on the scenario, it will get executed. Or if we press run once, we can also decide to process existing, which will always take the next element that is waiting in our queue and process that one. Or we can even say listen for new if we want to keep our queue existing, but still want to test new data. Like if I press listen for new, and then it will start spinning and I can send the data one more time, and then it will be received right away, but our queue is still existing. So if I run this one more time, it says process existing. All right, so scenario turned off is no problem. Your incoming payloads will be saved into your queue. Now let's check another occurrence. If we turn on the scenario, but we turn off the webhook like so here. And now we try to send data again. It will actually give you a 400 bad request error response because your webhook is turned off and therefore the payload will be rejected and will not be queued. So that's very important to know. You have to make sure that your webhook is turned on or it will reject any kind of payload and it will not work properly. Let's get into some more concepts, and that is how to post data to a webhook from another Make scenario, for example. You have multiple options that you can do. For example, we are using this make a request to get the sample data again of our country list, page 1. And then we are not parsing it this time, so we get some raw JSON output, and I will show you how that looks like. Data looks like this. So we get the raw JSON that we can use now. And the first option would be to just forward the full body to a webhook. So we just set up a post request to the webhook URL. And then in the body, raw JSON application JSON, we use the data that we have received from our incoming module here. And that's all we need to do to forward it to our webhook. So here's our webhook. I will just let this run once and then forward this one time and then check the output on our webhook. It looks like this. So the data got parsed on our webhook and now we can use it further. If you have an incoming webhook and you want to forward that data instead, you will have to make sure to go to edit and then show advanced settings and turn on the JSON pass-through setting here. If you enable that one, save, okay. And then let us run this whole thing one more time. Then you will also get a raw JSON here, which you can then forward further. So if your webhook is the first module and you want to forward that one further, you can enable the JSON pass-through to get the raw data and not let Make parse it automatically. So I will enable that again, or disable the JSON pass-through one more time because we are not going to need it for this case. And another option that you have as well is using query strings to forward data to another scenario. Therefore, we're going to parse the data first. You can also turn on the parse response here, but now for this example, you can also use the parse JSON module. We don't need any data structure. If you leave it empty, Make will do its best to parse the JSON, and that works very well. And then you can post it as a query string. Therefore, using a URL here, again, post method or get method both work with query strings. And then here you can just add an item, for example, the country name. So let me show it to you one more time. Query string, add a parameter. You can give it a name, and then you can select the value that you want to pass forward. In that case, we're taking the first country name in our list, which is Costa Rica, and then forward that to our webhook. It's probably not Costa Rica, but the sample data shows Costa Rica here for the first one. All right, let's run this one more time and check what the output looks like. Oh, actually, that was too fast. And here is the output. So it forwarded country name Afghanistan. Now let's add in a third way of how you can forward data with the make request, and that is by sending files to something else. So the method would be multipart. It's a post request, and then the body type is multipart form data. And here you can add fields and select the field type file. And now it allows you to give it a key file, for example, and then you can map the file from a previous module, or you can map the data and the file name here, including the suffix, and how that looks like with the Google Drive module, for example, to download a file like this. And then you will have the option here to simply select the download a file module, and it will forward it to that endpoint, the file, and then you can use it further there. There are a bunch of APIs out there that require multipart form data if you want to upload a file, and this is how you can do it easily with the HTTP module. Let's look at some more tactics that you can use, and that is using multiple triggers. Another question a lot of people are asked is, how can I use multiple triggers within one scenario? Well, the simple answer is you can't. But there's a workaround that you can use to make it still happen. And that is, if you have multiple triggers, just create multiple scenarios for each trigger, one scenario. And then you use an HTTP module, just like I've shown you before, to forward the data to your main scenario. So our main scenario would be this one over here. We just copy the webhook URL and then put that into our make a request post. And then we append the data that we receive from our webhook that we want to forward to this one. So for example, email and name, and then I'd say Manuel, and the email info@techflow.ai. So I want to forward that to my main scenario. Of course, this would be mapped from our webhook, but since I have not set that up completely now, I won't map it here, but that will make sense, of course. And then I can also rename that forwarding. And of course, don't forget to save. All right, so that will get your trigger data and forward it to the main scenario. And that's all what this scenario would do. Then you can do the same, copy and paste to your trigger number 2, where you would have the other form data or other data, for example, support. And our AI assistant is called Tony. So that will be the forwarding email or the data from our second trigger, which will be forwarded to our main scenario. And then the main scenario, it simply starts off with a webhook, and then we receive the data there and can do whatever we want. For example, setting it up on a mailing list platform, we can have a big scenario here. You can even have multiple branches and then check, okay, if the data is, for example, trigger 1, you can append that to your data. Like you can say, okay, this is actually trigger 1, trigger, and then you can just give it the ID 1. And then inside your second scenario, you can filter and say, okay, if the trigger is 1, then do this and that. If the trigger is 2, then do this and that, or just do the same actions here. This is very helpful, for example, if you have a bunch of HubSpot forums that you want to use, because every single hub forum has a separate webhook, and then you can forward them to one main scenario where you actually add them to your mailing list or something similar. Lastly, I want to show you a simple way how you can create a simple page with a webhook response. First, let me demonstrate how that looks like, and then we will get into how we can set it up. So if you open the webhook on the web, you will get a nicely formatted table. You can probably format it nicer, but we won't talk about HTML too much in this one. Here's a nicely formatted list of the countries, the country index, the ISO 3, and the official languages based on our table. And this is simply a webhook response. So we just opened the URL of the webhook and it gave us this as a web page when we put it into the browser. How does it work? Well, we receive the webhook just as normal. We get the data like we have done a couple of times before already of our country list, the sample data. Then we are iterating through the countries, and we have already talked about that before. And this is like a step where we create the table dynamically with the text aggregator, with the table rows and table data. I won't talk too much about the structure here. You can find a lot of resources how to build HTML, but this is a way how you can create a simple table, row separator, new row, and then inside the webhook response, you can put some simple HTML text, HTML table, and then the header lines, and then the actual content of the table elements. And that will output the page that you've just seen in your browser. I hope you like these ideas of what else you can do with webhooks. So remember, your webhook needs to be turned on, otherwise your payloads will get lost and it will not work. If your scenario is turned off, it's okay because the webhook payloads will be stored inside the queue. You have multiple ways to forward data. You can post it as JSON and send it as raw body. You can also use query strings and append parameters to your URL request. Or you can also send it as multi-part form data if you want to forward files, for example. Then there are also workarounds for using multiple triggers in one scenario, or for one scenario basically, and that is having different scenarios for the triggers and then forwarding the data to your main scenario where you actually execute on whatever action you want to do. And lastly, you can use the webhook response to create simple pages or even more advanced pages with HTML in your response. Let's move on to the next video.